Welcome, everybody, to the Blueberry Pediatric Podcast. We are here today with Joanne Cazeau, who is a multilingual speech-language pathologist with experience with therapeutically supporting babies and toddlers with diverse speech and language needs. Her child-centered approach employs evidence-based techniques while prioritizing inclusive, culturally, and linguistically responsive care. Joanne is the owner and founder of Cozy. How do I say that? Cazeau, thank you, speech therapy, a New Jersey-based private speech therapy practice that takes a unique whole child and multisensory approach to supporting early communication. When she is not working with clients, Joanne dedicates her free time to helping caregivers develop their child's potential through her Instagram platform at Beyond Babbles. Welcome, and thank you for joining.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me, Lindsay.
Of course, I looked at your Instagram. It's pretty awesome. You've got tons of followers. So clearly you're providing like really meaningful support to parents, which in a field that's very necessary.
Exactly. Yeah, no, I absolutely love doing that. Caregiver education is my favorite part of my job. So I'm very blessed to be able to do it every day.
Awesome. And it really shows through what you do. So I'd love to know like what inspires you to feel that way.
Yeah. So actually my family has had multiple experiences with speech language pathologists. So growing up, my sister was language delayed, and we grew up in a multilingual household. And the advice that was shared with my family, which is a myth that I want to debunk, is that because we spoke multiple languages at home, that my sister was confused and that she was overwhelmed, and that's why she really wasn't talking. And then later on in life, when my family moved back to the US, I was evaluated by a speech language pathologist, and I was determined to have a language disorder, but really I didn't speak English and I was evaluated in English, so that didn't make very much sense. And thankfully my mom was my biggest advocate, and she was the one who advocated for ESL classes and extra supports, and then so that diagnosis was able to leave me. And I've been thinking about speech therapy ever since I left high school, and I really knew that just based on experience alone and just knowing how much of a difference that I wanted to make in the field, that I really wanted to pursue speech language pathology. So yeah, that's how that happened.
That's incredible. So like a lot of background history, bringing the passion to what you do every day and brings so much meaning to your work, which is incredible. Yeah. There's so much there to dig into. We're going to start with the childhood part of it because I think that's what a lot of parents want to know. Yeah. Starting with like what do parents need to know about child language development before they have a child or even in like the very early stages?
Yeah, I think a few things, Lindsay. So I think one, that parents need to know that they can actually start supporting their child's speech and language development from birth, right from the start, really using things that they have at home and really using the routines that they're already going through, right? Like diaper changes or book reading or cleaning up or, doing the dishes. You really don't have to, and families really don't have to think too much outside the box when they're trying to support their child's language. It's really taking what already happens in their day and embedding some meaningful strategies in order to be able to support their child's language. And I think the other thing that I want parents to know is that, yes, all children do develop at their own pace, but there are some skills that we are looking to happen at a specific point in your child's development that lets us know which children are developing in the way that we're expecting them to. And then it also lets us know which children might benefit from some extra support. So I think that's two things that I would tell parents.
Right. And so there's no like hard and fast answers like guidebook and rules. It's everything's on a continuum and needs like a really holistic, multidisciplinary approach with the family. Is that safe to say?
Yeah, of course. So everything is on a continuum. I think it's helpful for parents, and again, like parenthood doesn't come with a guidebook, right? It doesn't come with this is exactly what you're supposed to do and this is exactly what you're supposed to know. But there are some expectations of what we expect speech and language to look like, but also understanding that there are some variations from child to child. And then there are so many resources out there too.
Absolutely. So let's start like age-wise to try and break this down. What should parents do in those very early like weeks and months with a baby? And do you think it impacts development a lot later on?
Yeah. So anything that you do in the forefront, right, always is going to benefit your child. So with any kind of skill, and with any kind of an activity, like a supportive developmental activity, I always say that it's better to start early than to not start at all. So in those very first months, let's talk about like the first 4 to 6 months, for example, or like maybe even like just the first 6 months. You can do like children's vision is still developing, right, in those first 6 months. So they have black and white vision, right? So one thing that we love to do is recommend black and white books. I know sometimes when you walk into a store, right, you see all those really, really big, bright, shiny books, and they're super fun and they're super cute, and you just want to grab all of them off of the shelf. But if we really think critically about where kids are in those first 6 months, they are attracted to high contrast pictures because their vision is still developing. They're seeing kind of like grayscale. So we want to engage them and show them some really nice high contrast pictures. So black, whites, and reds, right? So reading books with them that have those nice high contrast pictures, and then also using lots and lots of exaggeration, making lots of silly faces, making silly sounds, making silly shapes with your mouth because they're looking, right? They're looking for that visual stimulation. So in playing with them and in reading with them, you're giving that to them. And then you're also starting to support those building blocks of language.
Awesome. I
Yeah.
think it also helps just habit forming. Like you're talking out loud all the time.
Yeah.
You're expressive and engaging. And the reading, I think I always felt silly. Like my kid's a week old. Like, why am I reading a book?
Yeah.
And like as pediatricians, we say, read them a book, read them a book, read them a book.
Yeah.
But I think it's more so like habit forming and exercise forming and the exposure that
Mhm.
is so important too when they're little.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I definitely agree. And I know that book reading too can be something like where parents feel really silly doing it. And the way that I read books sometimes, my families will see it for the first time and say, oh, I don't read a book like that. Whoa, like, how do you do that? It might feel silly in the beginning, but just remember the big picture that it's all language building. And there's so many other things other than reading a book, right? I am like a booknista. You can see I have like shelves of books behind me. But it is really narrating what you see throughout the day, right? Using parentese. So parentese is that high pitched, sing songy, really stretched out way of talking. And when parents don't understand when I'm explaining parentese, I know that they know one person that we both know, and that's Miss Rachel, right? She uses that high pitched, sing songy voice, and that's why children are really attracted to her when she presents songs or like when she's talking. And so you do it naturally when you see a little child, right? So it's something that comes naturally to adults when we see small children, is that naturally our voice goes up, and then we get really sing-songy and really like over exaggerate our voice. So that's something that research shows that babies' brains actually hold on to. They're very attracted to parentese. So let's use that kind of talking to be able to build up their language skills and map language onto their brain. So hi, right? Like while you're doing a diaper change, hello, good morning, right? Oh, that's stinky. Let's take up, right? And you're doing a
Yeah.
diaper change, and it's something that you would do anyways, right? I think the statistics is like in the first year of a child's life, they get 8 to 10 diaper changes a day. That is a lot of diaper changes, right? So it's something that's happening naturally in the routines anyway. So why not take that opportunity to talk about what you're doing, to maybe sing a song, right? Peekaboo is really great to play in the first year because children are working on joint engagement, which is I see this thing, you also see this thing, we're looking at it together, right? And then children are also working on something called object permanence, which is just because your eyes disappeared doesn't mean that you've left the room. You're still there, right? So when you cover your eyes and you go pika, your child is actually going, oh my goodness, where'd mama go? Oh my goodness, where'd dada go, right? And then you go boo, and they go, oh, dad's eyes were just covered, but just because I couldn't see their eyes, that doesn't mean that their body was not there, right? They're still there.
Mm-hmm.
And that translates to later language because children learn that we can still talk about things that are not in the room. So that's kind of the association with language that comes later on. So we can talk about the car that's outside while we're in the living room. So it's really helpful to be able to build some of those skills. And singing songs, there's so many really fun nursery rhymes, and you can even make up your own, which is what I do as part of my job. job every day is that I just
Oh,
make up
that's hilarious.
songs. Yeah. And they're called piggyback songs. So I'll take a tune that I know, and then I'll just change the lyrics, and then I'll talk about what we see in the room, or I might talk about what we're playing with, right? The piggy on the bus goes moo, 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 because we're playing
Oh,
with
yeah.
a pig, a piggy toy. And I said moo,
Yeah.
moo, moo. Oh my gosh, what am I doing? I said the piggy on the bus does not
I
go
didn't
moo.
even catch
No,
it.
do not sing that. The piggy
I
on
was
the bus
like,
does
that's
not go moo.
great.
The piggy on the bus does not go moo. It goes oink. But you can kind of change the lyrics based on what you're playing with, right? If you're playing with a pig in a school bus, you can change the lyrics and sing that way. And those are
Yeah.
all language building strategies. So there's lots and lots and lots to do, I think, in the first
I
year.
credit Baby Shark with being the most catchable tune of the century, and I think all my, I guess you're calling them piggyback tunes,
Yeah, piggyback songs.
are to Baby Shark, and I need to change that. I mean, like, we do change the dike, change the dike,
Yeah.
I didn't even know I was doing it.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. So you're doing it. Sometimes parents don't notice what they're doing. And I love to call that out. Like, did you just notice that you just made up a song? Or did you just notice that you did X, Y, and Z? And they're like, oh, wow, is that helpful? And I say, yeah. So some of the things families are doing already, and they just don't know that it's helpful, right? But they know to do it. So I give credit to families for doing a lot more than they think too.
Right, like it's inherent, and they're doing a great job at baseline. I think there's a lot of concern and worry that just comes naturally also with being a parent. So when do parents really need to worry? If you want to break it down into age groups or something for the explanation for this, because I know it's very nuanced, but when is it warranted for that we worry?
Yeah. So I'll actually do this. I'll answer your question by talking about like 3 key skills that children need to have in each age group. And then we'll talk overall, right, in the first 3 years, what parents need to look out for. Because I think it's helpful to know what you should expect, right? And then that should also help guide when you should worry. So I have like my little handy dandy list here. So in the first 3 months, we're really looking for a baby to cry and coo, right? That's when we start hearing those long vowel sounds. Ooh, ah, and they're just kind of trying to figure out their voice, and that's called vocal play. And then they're also smiling in the first 3 months, right? And then they start to recognize your voice while you talk. And between 4 to 6 months, we're looking for them to do something called canonical babbling, which is the earliest form of babbling. So they're just taking a consonant sound and a vowel sound, and they might go ma, right? Or they might go right? So we're just looking for them to start to have those nice consonant sounds, pair them with some vowel sounds, and then really start to do the earliest forms of babbling. And then around this time, we're also looking for them to giggle and laugh, right? That's kind of the first indications of social language and how they use language to communicate with other people. And then during the first 7 to 11 months, that's when we really start getting lots of language. So we're really looking for kids to start putting strings of vowels and babbles together. So they might go ba, 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 or ma, 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 ma. And then what we're looking in this kind of babbling is that kids are repeating the same strings of sounds over and over again, right? So ma or ba or p, they're saying that sound over and over again. And then at that time, they might start to look at you when you ask them a question, right? They start to try to experiment with different speech sounds. And then they also like to play games, right? Which is why I tell you in the first year, playing peekaboo or like I Spy or something like that while you're doing the diaper changes. They actually enjoy doing this in the first year. So why not use it to build language? And then at 12 months, right, we start to get some words, but then we're also getting lots of something called variegated babbling. So that's when they have babbles that have different strings of sounds together. So it might sound like this, right? And then I love it too. Like that. Yeah, and then around this time too, it kind of starts to sound like they're having a conversation with you, right? And then they're so in their conviction that they're talking to you and that they're telling you like a story about what happened. And it sounds very conversational. It sounds like an adult conversation, but it's lots of nonsense. And that's something called jargon, right? So in my head, so that's when we get lots of jargon that starts to come up. And then, so at 12 months, we're looking for children to have 1 to 5 words. Sometimes when I say that, my parents automatically freak out, but I want to explain what that range means because I think it's really important to know what those numbers mean. So the lowest number of the range always is the milestone. That's what most kids are doing. That's what 90% of kids are doing. So 90% of kids at 12 months have about 1 to 2 words. And then the second number in the range is the highest number, right? That's the average. So many kids are doing this. So about 50% of kids have 5 words. So 12 months, we're looking for between 1 to 5 words, but really looking for at least 1 word. Yeah, so it's always helpful for, I think, parents to understand that. So if your child has 1 word or 2 words and they don't have 5, that's good. They're still doing what they need to do, which is at least 1 word. And then we're also looking for really good gestures around this time. So we're looking for about 10 gestures. And what I tell families is that we're looking for 10 meaningful gestures, right? So gestures vary across cultures, they vary across households. So maybe you might not have the thumbs up, right, in your culture, but you still have high and bye, right? Or you still have putting your hands up and putting your hands down, or you still have blowing a kiss. So we're looking for about 10 meaningful gestures. And then in 18 months, we're looking for 10 to 50 words. Again, if your child falls anywhere in between, they're doing pretty good. And we're looking for 16 gestures by 16 months. Again, any meaningful gestures that carry meaning in your household. And then at 24 months, we're looking for between 50 to 300 words. And then at 36 months, this is like the biggest gap, right? 250 to 1,000 words at 36 months. So it's a pretty big gap, but we're looking for at least 250 words. So I like to talk about what we should expect before talking about kind of like when we should get worried. So I'll pull up that actually now.
I just wanted to ask you a question about what you went through. I've heard a lot of parents say, well, they understand everything, but you're not hearing the vocalization. Is that still as concerning, or do you just assume like that would maybe come in time, but they're just maybe slower to express, but they understand?
Yeah.
Like
so
you know that the comprehension's there.
Yeah. So there's a range, right? So there are some children who understand language a lot more than they can express language, but we still want children to be within the normal range of how much language that they use. So if your child is understanding everything that you ask them and they can follow directions pretty well, but they don't have enough words or like the amount of words that we should be expecting, we would still consider that a delay. It would just be an expressive language delay. So receptively, right, they can understand and they can receive language and they can follow directions, but expressively they're having a hard time expressing their thoughts and their needs, right, their wants and needs. So they would still have an expressive language delay, but then receptively they would be just fine. And we find that that's pretty common. Lots of children who understand everything, but just they're just not communicating using words just yet. So I would still recommend an evaluation. Yeah, that was a really good question because that does come up pretty often. All right, let's talk about some early signs. So these are some early signs. They are grouped, but I will go through them. I'll talk slow so that everyone can hear the information. So between 0 to 3 months, right? Really like newborn stage. If your child is not smiling or they're not playing with you, right? Remember those first 3 months, they're really engaged, they're looking, right? They're looking for that social interaction. So in those first 3 months, if your child is not playing or not smiling, that would be a sign that they might benefit from a speech language assessment. Between 4 to 7 months, if they're not babbling, right? That's when babbling really starts to emerge, some of that early babbling. Between 7 to 12 months, if they're only making a few sounds and if they're not using any gestures. So gestures are really important because children learn to communicate using gestures before they learn to communicate using words. That's why when we're supporting young children in their language, we teach them sign language vocabulary like more or all done or give me. And then between 12 to 18 months, if your child is only saying a few words. So at 12 months, we're looking for at least 1 to 5 words. And then by 18 months, we're looking to 10 to 50 words. So if your child is only saying a handful of words between 12 to 18 months, then they might benefit from an evaluation. And then between 18 months to 2 years, if your child is not putting words together. So really children start to put words together right between 18 to 24 months. They start to put just 2 words together to start, and then eventually they'll start putting putting 3 words together. So maybe mama go, or more drink, or more milk, right? So if they're not starting to combine words between 18 to 24 months, definitely seek out a speech therapist. And then at 2 years, if they're saying less than 50 words, and then between 2 to 3 years, if they're not talking to their peers, or if they are having trouble playing, that's also a really good sign to seek out a speech therapist.
Great. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
A lot of times even when we learn about it or like you read about it, it says like when to worry. So I'd like to reframe that because, we're always going to be worried. We're parents, but
Yeah.
it's more like when to seek advice, when to seek an
Mm-hmm.
evaluation, when to make an action plan. What does this look like? And I'm prefacing this with the fact that it's very confusing. If
Mm-hmm.
you've never been in this position before, which like none of us are until we're there, you don't know what the resources are that you're even supposed to be asking for.
Yeah.
So first, I think, the kids come in and you're evaluating in a pediatrician's office, your basic milestones by age. And when they're little, you're doing it at very short intervals, like 2, 4, 6 months, you're coming in regularly. And that continues until basically like 2 years of life.
Mm-hmm.
So the pediatrician will say, let's get an evaluation. This now enters your world. So do you mind walking us through what that is like?
Yeah. So when kids are that young, sometimes, right? Well, I'll tell you kind of like what my referral process is for assessments. There are three options. Families have 3 options for where to seek therapy. So if your child is under 3 years old, you can actually contact early intervention. So early intervention is a federally funded program. In some states, in most states, it's free, right, to receive therapy services. And then in some states, it's a cost share basis, which means that depending on your household size or depending on your income, you pay a portion for the services, and then early intervention or your state will pay, the other portion of the services. And what I like about early intervention is that you get services in your home or in school or wherever really is your child's natural environment, which is where they spend the most time. So if that space is a church space, or if it's daycare, or if it's the playground, or if it's a parking lot at ShopRite, your early intervention therapist will come and deliver services there. And FYI, I have delivered services in the parking lot of a
Really?
big store. Yes, I
That's so
definitely have,
funny.
because that's where they spent their time, and so that's where I met them, right? And that's where the language was most meaningful. So early intervention is one option, and with early intervention, it's as simple as either typing in early intervention and then your state and kind of like a search bar, right? Or it's as simple as going to the CDC website and then they have an early intervention by state contact page. So you can just go to the CDC website, type in early intervention in the search bar, and then just scroll down to your state. They have all the information down to email, phone number, who you should contact, etc.
That's key. And this is for up to age, but
so this is up to age 3. So services end the day before your child's 3rd birthday. So that's important to note. And the reason why I reiterate that is because some families will reach out, right, at 33 months, right? And that gets really close to the 36-month mark. And then just think about, you have to do an intake, someone has to come in and evaluate, and then you're really not left with enough time to start services. And that's why I say with early intervention, better that you call, they come, do an assessment, and tell you that your child is okay. And then you can start services right away before they turn 3.
That I just want to clarify. So that's like the first step. So it's like something is identified as something that needs attention. So like you've been screened at the pediatrician or you've taken a survey, and then it kind of like sets off the alarm of like, now more is needed.
Yeah.
So EI, early intervention, EI,
Yeah.
will then do the evaluation to determine what services are necessary.
Exactly. And then when you do an intake call, and that's how it starts with the EI process, is that you'll do a phone intake call and you explain exactly what your concerns are. Like Bobby is not speaking yet, and he's 2 years old, or he's really not putting words together, and he's 27 months. And then based on what you've expressed on the intake call, they will dispatch the appropriate providers to come and do the assessment, and then they'll make recommendations. you might have a concern about just speech, right, and language, and an EI assessor might come in and decide, you know what, actually, I think that they would benefit from PT services as well, right? So they're really looking at the whole child. So early intervention is just one option in terms of therapy, right, for a young child. The
And it
next
offers, like you said, multiple types of therapy. So they have
exactly,
the capacity to then deliver PT, which is physical therapy, OT, which
yeah,
is occupational therapy. I'm sure there's others.
yeah.
But that's why it's such a valuable resource that everyone's entitled to in America. So everyone should know about it.
Yeah. And besides services, they also offer social services, right? So if you need a social worker, if you need access to transportation, if you need
Yeah.
access to a communication device, right? Like a high tech communication device, these are all services that you would have access to through early intervention.
So
So,
key because
yeah,
and I mean you could tell more than everyone more than I can like why these are so important to get when they are little. Can we talk about that a little bit? About
yeah.
like what if you miss it? Why is it so important to get in little when they're
Yeah.
young?
So the first 3 years are really what we think about as early childhood professionals as the most critical part of a child's development because their brains are like a sponge, right? Their brains are so plastic and they're making quick connections every day. Just think about all the new skills that you see in your child's first 3 years, right? It's almost like they're picking something up every day, and every day is a new experience. Everything is new to them, right? That's why they get into things. They're touching things. They're trying to experience the world through their entire body. And so that's why in the first 3 years, we want to take advantage of any opportunities to provide learning opportunities, but then also to provide therapy because that's the time that they learn the fastest, right? And their brain is kind of like picking up things on the go. So we really want to make sure that we're intervening at that point.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, very
Yeah.
important because then their literature does show that if you wait and you're reactive later instead of proactive earlier,
Yeah.
there's like just more detriments and more even like cost on healthcare, on families, on picking up the pieces that were missed earlier.
Yeah. And then this is also why we don't recommend wait and see, right? So we recommend check and see because we want to make sure that we're catching children in the moment where they have the most needs. But also, we know that. I know that a lot of families will say, will they kind of grow it out on their own, or will they kind of catch up on their own, right? They're delayed now, but will they kind of catch up? Or I know someone's child too; they were delayed, but then they just kind of caught up on their own. And what the research shows is that even though some children do look like they're catching up on their own or they have caught up on their own, they tend to have more trouble later on, right, with reading or with social skills, social emotional skills later on, because they didn't receive that intervention earlier. So
Great
again, it's
point.
kind of like what you said, right? Like acting instead of acting retroactively, we're being proactive.
Yeah, really good,
Yeah.
really great point. So then when they enter the EI, they get evaluated.
Mm-hmm.
What's how do they determine what's necessary?
Yeah. So the early intervention assessor will use formal testing. So usually that's something like the Patel, right, which looks at different areas of development, communication, adaptive, motor skills, fine and gross, and they will deliver that assessment, and then based on the assessment, they will determine what services your child needs and if your child qualifies. So they need to use a specific criterion, right? And I believe that it's 1.5 standard deviations above the mean, which is really kind of like a marker that they use to determine whether or not your child qualifies for services, just kind of like based on that marker. And then your child really just needs to qualify for one area, right? So they might qualify for communication, but then not qualify for PT or something like that. And then based on that, you would come back and actually have a meeting, right? Like either in person or virtually, and then talk about the recommendations that were made based on the data that they got from the assessment. So, this is the score that he got for communication. We're recommending therapy. And then you can either accept or deny services. That is completely up to you. If you deny services, you can always call up early intervention again. I think you have to wait just a month before you call back. If you change your mind, you can always call back and say, hey, I would really like to pursue services. And then you kind of do restart the process all over again, but at least you know that this time around you're ready.
Services are a great thing.
Yeah, they're
I
great.
would never tell anyone to deny them. It's wonderful.
Yeah.
And it's like an extra layer of someone having eyes on your child that like is very knowledgeable and wise about child development. So
Yeah.
it's awesome. I will say there's one thing to this. So like say your child doesn't qualify we really think they need help.
Yeah.
This is what bothers me. It's like, really, what are the options? Because
Yeah.
there's not many. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but what are the options at that point?
Yeah. So if your child does not qualify for early intervention services, one, always know that you can get your child reevaluated. So you wait a month out from the day of the service. So like a month out from the day that the evaluators came to your house and did the assessment, you can call early intervention back and ask to be reassessed. That is part of your right. And you can do that, right, if you don't agree. And then the other options are, right, that you can go privately through therapy. So you can, have a conversation with your pediatrician. Sometimes they have referrals just based on their relationships and people who they know around, or, people who they trust to be working with your child. So your pediatrician can make a recommendation to someone who is in your area to be able to get an assessment. Now, I say private therapy, but I really just mean therapy that is not like provided by a school or provided by early intervention. So you go to a speech language pathologist who either is in network with your insurance or is not in network, which would be like a private pay provider or an out of network provider. And then those services based, depending on what practice you're going to, would be provided either in your home, which is what I do, provided in a school or a daycare, or provided in a clinic-based setting. And then it would be it's like kind of similar to early intervention and not, depending on like where the services are happening. If it's in a clinic, it looks a little bit different, obviously. If it's in your house, a lot of the therapy does tend to look like parent coaching, right? So the therapist is showing you these are the strategies that you can use in order to build language. And I love that because when the therapist leaves, right, you still have those strategies that you can use your child to continue to build language.
Absolutely.
I do my therapy that way because I know that, right, based on the research, children spend 84 of their waking hours with a caregiver, whether it be a parent or a teacher. One of the things that I love about being in the home is that you get to do a lot of parent coaching, right? So the therapist will come in and the therapist will show you the strategies, the language building strategies, so that you can use once the therapist leaves. And one of the reasons why that's so important and why I do home-based therapy is because children spend about 84 of their waking hours, and this is what the research shows. Research shows that children will spend about 84 of their waking hours with a caregiver, whether that be a parent or grandma or someone at school. And then the therapist will only see them for about an hour, right? Especially if that happens in the clinic. So I like to be there to be able to show the strategies to the caregivers so that they can use those strategies when I'm not here, because I'm coming in for 1 hour of the week, sometimes 2 hours of the week, right? Depending on what the need is. And then there are 82 other hours where they're not with me. So I love to be able to put the strategy, or like put the power in the parent's hand or the caregiver hands, so that they can carry over some of the strategies that we're using in therapy, so that we can kind of see like the maximum potential.
Right. So hopefully it's a partnership between the parents, the caregivers, whoever that may be, and then like even teachers. If you're in the room with them, you give them
Yeah.
strategies. It's really important. Yeah, great.
Yeah. Yeah. And
So
then
that's
no,
go
I was
ahead.
going to say, I know that you said there aren't a lot of options. So there's early intervention. So that's for children, any child under
Right.
3, right? And then it could also be like really, really young children. So I know that it's very rare that you see really young children in early intervention, but I have seen kids as young as 8 months. I have seen kids as young as 11 months in early
Hmm.
intervention. As long as they are not meeting those goals, they are still eligible to start services. So it's early intervention for kids under 3. And then you can go to private therapy, right? A speech therapist who is either in network or out of network with your insurance. And I find that the easiest way to kind of go about this is literally to call up your insurance provider, right?
Yes.
If you have a caseworker, then that's even better. And you can say, hey, I'm looking for speech therapy services for my child. My pediatrician recommended it. I even have a script. Can you send me a list of like 10 speech therapists within, the 5-mile radius from this zip code? And they can text it to you or they can email it to you, and then you can kind of start making the calls. And then the evaluations look different, right? My evaluations are mostly play-based. And then I use that to compare it to a formal assessment like the PLS. So we'll come in, we'll do lots and lots of play, because that's what children do. That's their job, right? That's kind of like a child's occupation. We'll do a play-based assessment. I'll get the data from that, and then I'll translate it to some more formal information. And then once you've done the assessment, you pretty much start therapy right away, right? In any setting.
Okay, great. That's
Yeah.
really helpful. I think these concrete steps, so like the EI and your resources, your insurance company and those resources, should you go private, it's just finding people in your community who are able to do this that you like and connect with. When you
Yeah.
go through your insurance, I will say one other thing that really is frustrating is that there may not be a lot of available people in your area to help do this. Like you, this is why this field is so coveted and special. And I mean, you train years and years and years to be proficient and an expert in this field. So everyone listening, like these professions are awesome, and we should, like, they are, in my eyes, especially having kids who need them, like they are it for me. Like, these are the people that I lean on who know how to deal with kids in these specialized areas. So they're very special.
Yes. And you know what, Lizzie, I almost forgot one like major resource, but this would be for a child older than 3, right? So if your child is older than 3.
Let's talk about this group, because this is, I think, a little confusing. So I'll tell you what confuses me, because this needs to be clarified also. Yes. So like, kids enter a public school system around age 5. And so like 3 to 5, like there's got to be something, right? But it's very confusing because I think it's very locally based. Please help me out here.
Yes. Okay. So this can happen regardless of your child was in early intervention or not, right? So if your child is older than 3, and it could literally be as soon as like today is their birthday, today is their 3rd birthday, or like, you know, they're 3 years and 1 day old, you can call up your school district, right? So I want you to open up a search bar and type in whatever town you live in, school district, and then put in the word child study team. So every district, every school district has something. Yes.
Child study team.
Child study team. Yes. So every district has a CST, or a child study team. And the child study team is responsible for evaluating any child who is in the district where parents have concerns about their development, right? So that child does not need to be in school, because I know, right, New Jersey has a rolling mandatory preschool program where like it rolled out a year ago or like 2 years ago, and some cities have it, some cities don't, some cities it's a lottery, and some cities you can just pretty much get in. But what's great about calling your child studies team is that if your child qualifies for services, so what they'll do is they'll do a nice phone intake, then they'll ask you to bring your child in, and they'll meet them for like 15 minutes, right? Really interact with them, kind of get a gauge of what's going on. Then they'll decide what areas of development they want to assess: motor skills, communication, adaptive, etc. And then over the course of 45 days, they will have you bring your child in to get assessed: OT, PT, etc., etc. And they have 90 days from the day that they call the meeting to start assessing to have your child assessed, to write up the evaluation reports, which can sometimes take a long time based on experience, and then to come to the table and talk about what services they're recommending for your child. Now, even if your child is literally like, again, like they're just like 3 years and 2 months, if they are eligible for, and it depends from state to state, right? Like what the criteria is. Sometimes you have to be eligible in 2 areas. Sometimes you have to be eligible in 1 area. If they're found to be eligible for services, period, they can start school right away, right? So I have a little friend who just started school, and he just turned 3 like less than a month ago, right? So they were able to assess him pretty quickly and get him started. And so he's in a general education program, but they pull him out to receive special education throughout the day. So he gets speech therapy in a pull-out setting in a separate room, and he gets occupational therapy in a special room, right? So again, like, even if your child is like not necessarily in school right now, right? They're between 3 to 5, and you're just like, what do? I don't have mandatory preschool in my town. Your town is obligated to assess your child and determine if they need services. And if they need services, have access, or like put them in a program where they can receive those services. What's really great about this is even if your child starts, right, even if your child has a summer birthday, they can still start, right? And then they can do something called extended school year, which will carry them over to September when school actually starts. And then they're eligible to do this, right, to be in the specialized program or receive specialized services until 5, or whenever like traditional school starts in your town. So child studies team, if you haven't heard of it, if you look it up, your town has one, or your district has one, or, you know, if it's like a congregate of 3 towns, like somewhere will have one, and then you can get your child assessed that way. Also, if your child is about to age out of early intervention, right? So if they're about to turn 3, which is when children age out of early intervention, 3 months before they age out of early intervention, you'll get a call from your service coordinator, and they'll tell you, you know, Timmy is about to age out of early intervention. Do you think that they still need services? Or they'll kind of call up the providers and say, how do you think he's doing? Do you still think he'll need services? And, everybody will come to the table and say, yeah, I still think he'll need some services. So early intervention will call the CST on your behalf and say, hey, we have this kid in early intervention. Everybody agrees that he still needs some speech therapy. We are going to set up the process for you. And I think that's kind of like the golden way that it can happen, is that parents will literally just sit back, and early intervention will do the whole thing for you. They'll schedule your meetings. They'll make sure that all your paperwork is in. They'll send in your notes from early intervention to the CST team. And all you have to do is bring your child in for the assessments. And then more likely than not, they will qualify for services, and then they can get that at school. So 3 to 5,
Very
that's
helpful.
what I would do. Yeah. And then
so
if you're
school district, basically, it's
exactly,
blanketed. That's very helpful.
yeah.
And so I would say use your pediatrician also as your resource for these sorts of things. There are developmental pediatricians who are specialized in evaluating, and this is like leaving this just the speech space, but they are helpful at evaluating. They're also almost impossible to get appointments with, but they are specialized in this area and have the ability to give tons of resources. Maybe even their office, if you're calling, you just need to be pointed in the right direction. These are also great places to start, but I love this. Like, you're at home, you just have to use your browser to look these things up, and the power is in your hands. This is what we want to do. Empowerment to the parents. And you mentioned it earlier, like, you got to advocate for your kids. It's hard and it's stressful, and you would want to imagine we're in a place where, like, they fall and, like, will be caught by bubbles and rainbows. But, like, you got to fight for your kids a lot of the time and be their best advocates.
No, definitely agree. And I think, like, parents, that's one thing that I tell my parents too, right? If you just have a gut feeling that there is something that your child needs, I always want you to follow that gut feeling, right? And if you are not getting the answers that make sense to you right now, if someone is telling you just to wait, or they're a boy, or, it's because you're speaking multiple languages, or something that just doesn't really make sense to you, and you know that your child has a need, to follow your gut feeling, because I know that parents are like their child's first teacher, and they know their child best, right? You spend the most time with your child. So I want you to feel comfortable saying, something is just not right, or, like, we really just need extra help, or I just don't feel like we're moving along or making the progress that we should be. So I want parents to feel empowered to be able to say that, right, to the providers until they get the answer that they're looking for.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah.
All right. Did we miss anything in terms of the evaluation and resources? Because I would love to move on to what your earlier comment about how you were raised in a dual language household.
Let's do it. We can move on.
Okay, great. I'm also, like, personally curious, because we're doing the same thing with my kids.
Okay.
So, like, what are common misconceptions around it? And then I have some specific questions.
So what are common misconceptions about growing up in a multilingual home, and, like, how that impacts?
And let's break them down and get them out of here.
Okay. So the most common one, right? I mean, there's, like, a couple, but the most common one is that speaking multiple languages or exposing your child to multiple languages will delay their communication development. And that is just not true. So the research shows that actually children who are exposed to multiple languages tend to have really, really nice language skills, right? They're able to learn words really quickly, and they're able to learn words a lot easier. And then also, when children are younger than something called the age of language acquisition, which is, like, before your child turns 8, like between that 8 to 12 age period, they're actually able to learn languages pretty quickly. So if you're able to expose your child to, like, 5 to 10 languages, right, they would be able to sound more native as young as they are, and they would be able to learn those languages really quickly. That's why you see a lot of adults, right, with their Rosetta Stone, or, like, a language, something like a Babbel app or something like that. And yet children, they're able to learn languages so quickly. So I always say, it's not going to delay your child's language. If your child has a language delay, if they're not saying as many words as they should be, and you've exposed them to multiple languages, the chances are that it's just a true delay. And whether you expose them to one language or 5 languages, that delay would have been there anyways.
Is there ever a case where you tell them to cut back to one language because the speech delay is pretty significant?
No. So even children who do have identified delays, we still continue to expose them to multiple languages. It doesn't stop them from learning learning language, right? They just need a little bit of extra support. So a lot of times what I'll find is, right, back to the receptive versus the expressive, the child will understand all three languages. They just don't have the skills yet, right, to be able to express them, but they understand just fine. So we still want to continue giving them access to the language rather than not. And what I tell
Right.
families is that, yeah, I tell families that there's lots of different ways to be able to expose your child to language. So that's one thing that I might recommend, right? Maybe mom will speak, Tagalog, and dad will speak Spanish, or dad will speak English. Or maybe there's a method that's called, so that was kind of like one provider, one language. That's what the method is called. There's another method that's called place and time. So at breakfast time, we are only going to speak French. And then for the rest of the day, we're going to speak English. So, right, you can kind of choose. And then there's another method where you only speak one language at home, and then you expose your child to the other language and, in the greater community. So there's lots of different ways to introduce your child to different languages, but I definitely wouldn't say to stop or cut back to one language, even if your child is delayed.
That's great.
Yeah.
I think it's the greatest gift you could give to your kids to speak multiple languages. It just opens up so much culturally in their life and things that they can achieve. It's just so cool. And it's that critical period when they're little to get it in, because I could tell you, it's so hard to learn it when you're older.
Yeah,
so hard.
It's so much harder.
So, like it's nothing to them. It's just like extra words. They don't even realize. So yeah, super cool.
Yeah, start early for sure.
Yeah. All right. I'd love to talk about sign language and how you use it in your teachings and like what value it brings.
Yeah.
Because I do see a lot of like child-centered behaviors be utilizing a lot of the signs.
Yeah. So one thing that I do want to say is that I want to just reiterate, right? Like sign language is a legitimate language. And I studied sign language in college, and I actually took an American Sign Language culture class and like a deaf culture class, a deaf culture class with a capital D. And I just want to reiterate that it's a beautiful language, right? It has lots of rich historic meaning. And in talking about how I use it to support language development, I don't want anyone to get the idea that we're just kind of like using it in passing, or that it doesn't carry a lot of meaning. It does, and it's very important. So all that to say, children, they learn to use gestures to communicate before they learn to use words, right? So that's why in the first 12 to 18 months, we're looking for 10 to 16 gestures, right? And that's because children learn how to communicate using their hands and their bodies before they learn how to use words. Just think about it, right? Before your child might say, milk, they might point to the milk, right? Or they might wave, right? They might start waving before they say hi. So children learn to communicate using big and small body movements before they learn to use their words. So we use vocabulary from ASL to be able to support that in the meantime. And what I find is, because children already kind of have the knack to be able to use gestures to communicate, it decreases frustration, right? If a child can do this, but they can't say more yet, and they're really hungry and they just really want some more Cheerios, right? They can do this, and as long as we know what it means, we can say, oh, you want more Cheerios? Oh, let's get more Cheerios, right? Instead of your child crying or dropping or really being really frustrated that they can't be understood, we can give them something in the interim while we're working to get those first words, right? Those first spoken words. We can give them something that they can use to communicate so that they feel successful, and so that their wants and needs are met, and then so that we're decreasing like tantrums and really just them being upset and frustrated.
Would you ever assume that it would like dissuade them from learning the language because they have the gestures that you're appropriately responding to?
So this is the thing, right? When we're modeling the word, which I think that's kind of like where there tends to be a lot of confusion. When we're modeling the gesture, we're also saying the word. So we're not using the gesture in the absence of oral language or spoken language, right? So when we're doing this, we're saying more, yeah, let's get more. So they're hearing the word, they're still getting that model, and they know, okay, yeah, that's more. And it's going to be a little bit quicker for a child to be able to say their words once they do eventually start using their words. So just they then say more, like more up or more cereal or something like that. So we're still modeling the spoken, and we're still using the signs. That said, there are some children who will just traditionally just use sign language, and then we'll have like our non-speaking children, right? But then at least we're giving them a way to be able to communicate, and we're giving them the beautiful the beautiful language of American Sign Language.
Awesome. I love it. We did it with our kids, and we still like, I don't know, once in a while it just comes out, and my kids, even when they're older, and they'll do them more. I don't want to let go of my mic.
Yeah.
they'll do this more as
Yeah.
they're
Oh, that's
saying it.
fun.
And it's the best thing ever. Oh no, my mind. It's
Uh-oh.
the best thing ever.
Yeah.
So what are other misconceptions within the field that you hear about all the time that you'd like
Yes.
to put to bed?
Yeah. So one is that boys talk later than girls. So I hear this one a lot. And lots of times families will call into my practice and they'll say, like we talked to their teacher, we talked to, our pediatrician, and they said, just kind of like hang tight because, eventually he'll talk because, just give him a couple more months because boys talk later than girls. And I think it's one of those myths where like, it's the person probably read it as a big headline somewhere, kind of like when you read a big headline that summarizes the research, but then you don't actually go to read into the article to learn a little bit more about the headline.
It's like the eye catcher.
Exactly. Yeah. So it is kind of the eye catcher. And so here's what this research is actually, right? So boys within the normal range of when first words are supposed to come, boys will be in the later end of normal than girls, right? So if we're expecting children, right, to talk sometime or to say their first words between 12 to 14 months, girls might say it closer to 12 months, and then boys might say closer to 14 months, but it's still within the range of normal. So the late that people are talking about, where it's kind of like misconstrued, is only by like a few months, right? Like about 2 months. It's really a short amount of time. So we're not expecting, right? If you have a son and his language is really delayed, right? And like really delayed by months and months and months, as in, they're 18 months and they don't have their first word, that would be something that we would want to investigate or look a little bit more into. So it's still, when the research shows is that within the normal range, boys talk a little bit later than girls, but it's not just that boys talk later, so let's just wait and not intervene.
Right.
So
let's not just write it off.
Exactly. So I think it's one of those things where like they got the big picture, right? The big picture kind of like title that jumped out, but then we have to look into the research and see really how it's nuanced, right? Like what the explanation is behind that statement. So overall, that is not true. Can talk about, here's a really good one. So AAC. So AAC is augmentative alternative communication. So it can look like a lot of things. It can look like writing. It can look like using sign language. It can look like using a communication device, like a speech generating device, which is where you press a button and then it says a word. So there's this misconception that using AAC delays language. So I will have a lot of kiddos who come into my practice who, and I like to assess at 3 months and 6 months to see really where we are, right? We're using all of our strategies. We're using absolutely everything that we can. At 3 months, if I'm like, we're really not making any progress, I'm going to start introducing AAC. And lots of parents tend to think just kind of like sign language. Well, if we introduce AAC, doesn't that mean that they won't want to talk, right? And especially,
like, are we giving up on those skills that you think are taking too long to achieve?
Exactly. And what we always want to do is make sure that the child has a way to be able to express their immediate wants and needs, right? And so I will propose using a communication device, and that's kind of like the highest that you can go in terms of AAC. But it's always great to give the child the most dynamic form of communication. So an AAC device is great. And what the research shows, again, is that because the child has access to the picture, right, like the little icon, so they have that visual, that kind of like a pictograph, and they have access to the word, and when they touch the button, it says the word, right? They have access to 3 modalities that's helping them with word associations. They actually learn language faster. So I've actually had kiddos who have used communication devices in our first 3 months for like the first 3 to 6 months. And then like a couple months later, they'll say mama, or they'll say, I want milk, right? And so it's not expected that a communication device or that using AAC will delay language, right? It's actually the opposite. It's been shown to support spoken language.
Very interesting. I did not know that.
Yeah. And then, okay, I think there's also a caveat, right? There are some children who are non-speakers, right? And then they will end up using communication devices long-term. But I think it's important to kind of weed out which children will kind of use communication devices long-term. But the goal is always spoken language for many families.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
I also want to just mention one thing about your field, which I think is underappreciated, is that speech therapists are the the specialty that helps with feeding issues, whether it be bottle feeding a baby or eating and picky eaters even.
Yeah.
Swallowing issues, I don't know, mouth placement, you can probably articulate this much better than I can.
Yeah.
But can we get into like just a few minutes about how speech therapists help in this area as well?
Yeah. So I will say feeding is not my area of specialty, but I can
Okay.
kind of like on a general basis kind of address it. So speech therapy is like such a it's like such a broad name, but then it like really
Yeah.
doesn't tell you very much about what we say. So we support language, right? We support communication. So we support language, which is how people communicate their thoughts and feelings and their needs. We support speech, which is actually how you talk and make sounds that make that message. We also support feeding, right? So how you're able to take in food. And then we also support cognition, right? Which is like how you make decisions, planning, how you think about things, right? And then we also support like other forms of or alternative forms of communication, like AAC devices, using sign language, etc. And then we also support voice, which is the health of your voice, right? Like my voice is a little bit raspy. I have had voice therapy before, right? Like the health of your voice. And then we also support, oh my goodness, why am I forgetting one? Oh, and it just slipped out of my brain. That was probably like the cognition that I need. I totally forgot. I don't know why. I
That's
was like
okay.
thinking
There,
about
I
it.
mean, that was
But
a
like one
lot
more.
for the specialty. That's a
Yeah,
lot.
yeah,
So if parents are listening, I think it's really important to know that should you have issues, this is like the field that deals with all of those things, and
yeah.
it's so specialized that you need to know what you're looking for based on your needs.
Yeah. And then also, I think like with young children, right, with feeding, there could be so many things happening. Sometimes we hear lots about like tongue ties or like tongue thrust or like kind of things that are happening in the mouth where a child might need some surgical intervention. So I think if that's something that you're concerned about, yes, definitely reach out to a speech therapist who has specialized training in feeding therapy. And then you might also reach out to someone who's called a myofascial therapist or a myofascial therapist or oromyofacial specialist or like however they say their names. And that person is really dealing with the muscles in the face and in the mouth to be able to support feeding, to be able to support communication, like speech and articulation. And all of those things are related, right? Everything happening in the mouth is related. So sometimes we'll see like kids who have allergies or trouble sleeping will also have trouble with speech and articulation, and children who have trouble feeding will also have trouble with speech and articulation. So a lot of those things tend to be tied, like connected. So you might start seeing kind of like the same people, ENT, pulmonology, speech therapy, you know, like oro, and all of those things are connected, right? Because it's all coming from one place and it's all the same muscles. So
Yes, and there actually are. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say I collaborate a lot with speech therapists
Exactly.
who
That's
do
what I was gonna
feeding.
say.
So even though I'm a speech therapist, that is not my area of specialty. I focus on early communication development, but I might collaborate with a speech therapist who is a feeding therapist or a speech therapist who is an oromyofacial therapist, therapy specialist.
Yeah, I was going to take that one step further to say there's actually like institutions around that have groups made to function together in
Yeah.
multidisciplinary fashion so that all these extra specialized specialists
Yeah.
are talking to each other and making sure the best plan is made for the kids who might have multiple issues but can make one comprehensive plan together.
Exactly. That was good.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this podcast, Joanne. This was awesome.
Thank you. I hope I answered all of your questions.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's more and we will get more, and we should connect again at that point.
Yes.
But I really appreciate you coming on. Where can our listeners stay in touch with you?
Yeah. So your listeners can stay in touch with me at Beyond Babbles on Instagram. So that's Beyond BEYOND. Babbles BABBLES. And I'm also beyondbabbles.com. So on my website, I actually have a free resource library. I've noticed just from doing this for a very, very long time, and from being in lots of families' homes, that they have lots of questions and they're just looking for extra support. And I always tell parents, like, you don't have to be a speech therapist to support your child at home, but if your child needs that extra help, you can reach out to them. But I also find that it's just really hard to find resources and to find information about what to expect and how to support your child. So if you go to beyondbabbles.com/resources, you can actually access a free resource library where I give you free downloads to be able to access milestone information and just some tips tips and tricks to be able to use at home. So again, like you can start supporting your child's language from the day that they come back from the hospital at home. And I kind of lay that out for you. And then I'm also at cozespeechtherapy.com. So that is my New Jersey based private practice. I provide in-home services. And I really work with little friends, so children who are under 5 who have just extra communication needs. And then I also have some courses at Beyond Babbles that are focused and targeted to parents to be able to support them as well.
Wow, so much you're doing for the community. That's awesome. Thank you.
Of course.
And thank you so much for joining us on the Blueberry Pediatrics podcast, where your child's health is our top priority. Be sure to subscribe to the show to stay informed, empowered, and inspired to make the best decisions for your child's well-being. You can find the Blueberry Pediatrics podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.